Hey, what is up, guys? Tuesday vlog. No flying today because it's like 20 degrees and it's not too windy right now, but it's way too cold. But I wanted to do I wanted to do like a different type of video. And it's funny, if you guys watched the last Rotor Riot episode where we flew the wooden quads, that kind of ties in nicely to this, because this video is about the importance of using capacitors on your builds. More so with the HD stuff, it's like becoming even like more important just to get reliable performance. So let's go down to the table. I want to show you a couple of my builds and just how I have my caps installed and what it looks like, and then we'll come back up and talk about why. Alright guys, so yeah, I'm just going to show you a couple of my builds just to give you some examples of how I have my capacitors installed. So this is my CL1. It's still analog at the moment, but you can see the cap there on the front of the Newbie Drone 20x20 stack. That's the cap that it came with. And then on my HD1, this is the Newbie Drone 30x30, and it didn't come with a cap. But then after I realized I was kind of having some issues, I installed a cap on the ESC. And then I also, this is probably overkill, but I have a smaller cap on the 9-volt rail. And then my newest build, the Hyperlow. So now Emax, probably since this stack came out, this is a Mini Magnum V2. This came out I think in 2017. Again, Emax is a company that's kind of managed by US California based pilots, and so they recognize the needs and the demands of FPV, racing, freestyle, what have you. So they designed the Mini Magnum V2 with caps already built into the ESC. So if you get like an Emax Hawk Pro or whatever, you'll see these two caps on the ESC. Now the Caddx Vista is different, to where it doesn't need to be run off a regulator because it goes up to 6S. So this is running off direct battery power. The wires are just tied into the power leads there. Now I noticed in flight this was fine, but the other day I was flying with some friends and I tapped the ground and spun out, and my video locked up for a half a second. So after that I installed a cap directly onto the power leads of the air unit. It's probably easier if you take the air unit apart, or the Vista, if you take it apart. Be careful because it's connected by a row of like pin headers on this side, so don't just like rip it apart. But it's easier if you take this apart so you can have easier access to the pads if you're going to do this. You should probably do this, unless we'll talk more about that later. This is my Newbie Drone Vivid. Again, Newbie Drone 30x30 stack. Big old cap in the back, just on the ESC power leads. This particular quad with these particular motors, and again, we'll talk more about this. It is the first time I flew this line of sight, I knew I needed a cap. And we'll talk more about that. Again, with Emax, really forward thinking. The Emax Buzz comes with a cap built into the ESC, and this is the big Magnum V2. This was never released. I did test this stack with and without caps, and it's beast mode. It's too bad they never released this. I tested this ESC on 6S 2400 kV, and it was insane. Anyway, okay, so yeah, all these builds all have caps. I mean, it's just Even the Tiny Hawk 2, I didn't notice it. Somebody else pointed it out to me. Even the Tiny Hawk 2 has a small cap on it, like a tiny little baby cap. My Peanut build with the iFlight stack, 1616 stack, even that comes with a cap for the ESC. Probably overkill, but it came with one, so I put it on. Okay, let's go back up. Okay guys, so yeah, those are just a couple of my builds. And again, this is obviously a video aimed at like the newer guys out there, because again, I recognize that there are a lot of new people coming into the hobby, but it seems like every day on Facebook, in the official group, I constantly see people having issues with their HD video freezing. And I wanted to make this video to kind of explain one of the main reasons why that might be happening and what we're doing or what we can do to prevent it. So using capacitors on your build is not new. We've been doing it forever. Well, we've been doing it since the invention of active braking in BL Heli. So your quad has a flight controller and an ESC. That's a horrible example. So your quad has a flight controller and an ESC, and the ESC runs on BL Heli firmware. And a few years ago, the BL Heli developers invented something called active braking. So, you know, when you spin a motor, you're applying power to it to spin the propeller. So, okay, so you apply power, spins the prop, makes the quad go. What active braking is it's like reversing power to stop the motor from spinning. And that just like drastically improved flight performance, because when you think about a quad, if you do a flip and then stall, what causes that hard stop is the props, you know, essentially slowing down. If you didn't have that active braking feature, your stalls or anything, they wouldn't be as crispy or juicy or whatever you want to call it. So active braking greatly improved the performance of our drones, our quadcopters. Now, when you reverse the power to the motor for active braking, it causes the ESC to send a huge surge of, I think it's called like transient current, back through the power system. Voltage spikes, transient current, there's videos out there. I couldn't find one, but there's videos out there of people testing this with oscilloscopes and you know, showing it quantified. So the active braking sends those surges back through the ESC, and then it like wreaks havoc on the flight controller and the other components. So typically what we noticed initially, and it's worse on some ESCs have higher transient current than others. A really common one was the Emax Bullet 30 when that came out. I think it was 2016 or 2017. Because the ESC was, I'm not an engineer, but it was probably because the ESC was so small, didn't have a lot of copper, what have you. That ESC was really common for calling what we call death rolls. So a death roll is when those transient currents go back through the flight controller. It causes the onboard regulators to reboot. And when I say regulators, I'm talking about your 5-volt regulators, your 3-volt regulators. Now with the HD ready stacks, we have 9-volt and 12-volt regulators. So a lot of the times we see people talking about regulators, and you don't really have an issue with your regulator. You have an issue with your regulator not being able to handle the voltage spikes or the transient currents. So what we do is we install capacitors mainly on the ESC, because a capacitor is a reservoir, like a cup. So when it sends that voltage spike out, it fills the capacitor, and then the capacitor dampens that current going back into the system, so it's not like a huge shock. So it's just a capacitor is just a reservoir. It's like a small battery that holds power for a short amount of time. So that's why we install caps. And again, we've been doing this for many years. It wasn't uncommon back when we still used individual ESCs a lot on freestyle quads to install a small cap on each ESC, because the closer you can get the cap to the source of the power, the more effective it is. So with these HD ready stacks, like on the NewBeeDrone 3030, like on my Vivid build, I noticed when I built it, and this is going to depend, it's going to be impacted by the motors you use and the voltage you're running and how good your batteries are. But on my Vivid, I intended on running this on 4-cell, so I put 2600 kV motors on it. And like, the higher the kV your motors, and so the higher the kV your motor, the higher your chances for voltage spikes. So right after I built my Vivid, I took it outside to maiden it, and it death rolled because it wasn't even like, I hadn't even gotten to the point to checking the video because the voltage spikes were so bad, it just shut down the 5-volt regulator in the flight controller, which causes the flight controller to reboot, and it causes what we call a death roll. So you'll do like a flip, and the quad will just go like nuts and spin out of control. That we call that a death roll. And that's from your 5-volt regulator or your 3.3 or whatever, browning out and resetting the flight controller. As soon as I had that death roll, brought it back inside, installed a 1000 microfarad 1000 UF cap, and it fixed it. It was fine. And again, with my Hyperlow, with my RS, with the Caddx Vista, again, this doesn't need a regulator because it runs up to 6L, but I did notice bumping the ground and spinning out, I did get like a minor freeze, so I knew that it was still being slightly affected by those voltage spikes from, because when you hit the ground, that's the same as like, when you crash, that's the same as like having really hard active braking, and it sends a really big voltage spike. So I installed a small cap on the power leads for the Vista, and it's been fine since. I've like hit the ground a couple of times. One of the main reasons why people are getting freezing video on the HD system is because they don't have enough capacitance. So like, even if you have like say a small cap on your ESC and you're still getting freezing issues, you might need another cap on the 9 or 12 volt regulator feeding your air unit. If you don't have a cap at all, you should have a cap. If you have 2 caps and you're still getting freezing issues, it might be an issue with, then you might have an issue with the regulator in your stack. You know, the NewBeeDrone stacks are really good, the Hobbywing stacks are really good. You know, Rotor Riot uses the Hobbywing stacks, they swear by them, and they don't release this info, but they test a lot of them for their store, and they swear by the Hobbywing stack. I haven't personally tried one, but I know a lot of people love them. I've had really good luck with the NewBeeDrone stacks. My Emax Mini Magnum stacks are obviously good. Now, this is not, you know, this is like, if we're not talking about, you know, recording DVR. If we're recording, again, it goes back to using those V30 cards. So it goes back to using those V30 cards again. Where's my focus dot? You know, if you're recording and you're getting freezing, it could be an issue of your SD card. If your SD card's too slow, it's not going to be able to keep up with the huge well, not huge, but the file size that the air unit or the goggles are trying to write, and that could cause issues as well. But if you have good regulators and good capacitors, you shouldn't have any freezing issues. Now, I can't demonstrate this because it's cold and I don't have enough people to help me film it, but when I build an HD quad, or any quad, when I build any quad, this is always the way I've done it. When I build a quad, I configure it in Betaflight, I check the video on my goggles on the bench on the dining room table, and then I fly it line of sight. I fly it line of sight, do a couple of throttle pumps, then I'll do some acro, and importantly, not just acro, but you have to do stalls. So you have to do like a half flip, stall, and then finish your flip, or your roll. So when you stall, that's the best possible way to get up, like produce a voltage spike. High throttle, half flip stall. If my quad can do that, that's like my first QA check. If it can do that and not crash, we're off to a good start, because that means that the system is handling the voltage spikes. All quads have voltage spikes. It's just, there's no arguing it. You just can't. Like when I built my Vivid, I took it outside. Within 5 seconds, I did a throttle pump, I did a roll, and it crashed. So, I mean, like, I knew that I needed to add a cap. So if I can go out and do those stalls and not crash, then I get my wife to wear the HD goggles, and I'll do it again, and she'll watch the video. If it doesn't freeze, then it's ready for me to fly at FPV. So I do those two things first. I do line of sight, check for death rolls, no death rolls, I'm good, and then I have my wife check my video. That way, I'm not going out and flying and crashing my brand new quad, right? Does that make sense? So yeah, guys, I just wanted to give you some things to look at on your builds, some ways that you can test your builds before you just go out, you know, and crash them with freezing video. And you know, again, this is something that we've kind of it's been like a part of our build practice for years. A lot of people think we install caps to clean the video feed. That's not entirely accurate. If your video feed is that bad, it usually means, like, well, so with analog, it usually means that you need to run your camera power wire in a different way. Like if you run your camera power and your VTX power, or you run your camera power through the flight controller and it's noisy, you can usually just run the camera power straight to the VTX and it's clean. Maybe I can find a clip, but like even flying analog, like you could be racing, and if you didn't have enough capacitance, you'd crash, and it could cause your VTX to reboot, it could cause the camera to reboot. There was a race where my son, Zero, it was like the championship race of 2017, he won, and in one of the heats, he like crashed and it reset his RunCam, Swift, Micro, and so he had like orange and black video. It was crazy. But yeah, this is something we've known about for years. It's not bad. It's just, you know, it's just the nature of high voltage electronics and noise and these like insanely high performance quadcopters. It's just, it's not bad. It's not negative. It's just, you know, I order capacitors off Amazon and eBay in like bags of 10. And I've got a bag of capacitors on my table right now. It's just, it's not a big deal. It's just add capacitors just for peace of mind, even if you don't have any issues. It's just good build practice. My FR7, you can't see it because they're underneath the GoPro mount. My FR7 has two 1000 UF capacitors because it's a 7-inch quad. Okay, so let's talk about size real quick. Most builds will be okay with a 25 to 35 volt 450 to 1000 microfarad. If you look at a capacitor, it'll say UF, that's microfarad. 450 to 1000 microfarad. Low ESR if you can, Panasonic on eBay and Amazon. Most builds will be okay with those. If you're running like a 25 volt 330 microfarad cap and you're still having issues, try a 1000. Low ESR is better because low ESR, they fill up faster and dump faster. They work faster. Not really a video for the veterans out there. But again, guys, there's a lot of new people coming into the hobby, and you know, we gotta make it an enjoyable experience for them, so our hobby will continue to grow. I mean, the growth that we've seen in the past few months, it's so cool. It's so cool. And you know, it kills me to see these guys having issues with their freezing video. So we gotta help out. Special shout out to my buddy Jim Tapp. I see him constantly on Facebook helping people out with just dropping knowledge and answering questions. Thank you, Jim, for that. It's awesome. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments. I've got my little notebook. I'm thinking about doing another video on other build practices. I'm not sure. The capacitors is kind of like the most important one, again, because I constantly see people talking about freezing issues. So yeah, If you guys have any suggestions, complaints or comments, leave them in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching.